This is completely insane. Welcome to something incredible and pretty expensive. So we've managed to get one of every single Samsung Galaxy S and we're gonna speed test them. Just before we do that though, this is kind of an opportunity here, so we're gonna unbox them quickly and see how that experience compares. Let's start with the Galaxy S10. And I've lost my knife again. So the S10's retail packaging is robust, it's high quality, and I do like how the phone and all the accessories, they have a place. They fit neatly together, you get some pretty high grade AKG earphones inside, and I like how Samsung has finally settled on an all black accessory design. I'm gonna give this unboxing experience an 8 out of 10. Okay, Samsung Galaxy S9. The outer packaging isn't quite as minimal as what we saw on the S10. It's a little more wasteful, there's a couple of extra inserts that are not quite needed, but this is beautifully packaged, it's really sturdy, all the accessories are still there and they still match. Okay, S8, and this box is pretty much identical to the S9's. As well as barely changing the design of the phone between the S8 and the S9, the actual packaging barely changed too. So I'm still going to give this one an 8 out of 10 on that unboxing experience. Okay, onto the Galaxy S7. Which I must have spent a good 3 minutes trying to get open. But once inside, everything is generally similar. Although I gotta say, the quality of the box is a little lower. The accessories inside are not quite as snugly packed together, and the earphones included are nowhere near as good as the AKG ones on newer offerings. Although they are presented in this nice little box. Okie dokie, S6, and this is actually a phone that I've never unboxed in my life. Around this time the channel wasn't quite large enough to get invited to Samsung events, so kind of exciting. Before sticking to the all-black theme that they've got going on now, Samsung played around with an all-white theme with this phone, and it's decent, although the box quality itself is a further step down. Galaxy S5, and this phone picked up quite a bit of flack for the way it looked. I think a lot of the time it was being compared to a Band-Aid. Let's take a look for ourselves. So, now we're reaching a bit more of an experimental phase in Samsung's lineup, before they really found their footing with the Galaxy S series. Oh yeah, I see it. You can really see the lack of consistency here, between the way the phone looks, the way the accessories look, and the outer packaging. I'm gonna give this one a 4 out of 10. Alright, S4, which from the outside looks pretty much identical, although I think it's a tiny bit smaller. Yeah, tiny bit smaller. I remember when this phone was being announced, they pitched this as the Life Companion. Which, to be fair, is not a bad concept, it's just that what they meant by this was that the phone would be absolutely loaded with Samsung branded applications to monitor every aspect of your life. Got yourself an eco-friendly quick start guide. Samsung was really pushing their sustainability angle with this phone, and so this is the first time the box is made of 100% recycled materials. Alrighty, Samsung Galaxy S3, and you can see from the S4 the massive change in design aesthetic. Samsung is back to black, although with quite a bit less consistency than their more recent offerings. Packaging is quite clearly an afterthought here, everything's just kind of chucked in the bottom section. This one is still a 5 out of 10. So, whack that one over there. Galaxy S2. We're starting to get really old school here. Credit where due, the Galaxy S2's packaging is the most compact out of the entire range, and at least each component here feels like it has a place, and so I'm giving this one a solid 6 out of 10. Samsung Galaxy S. I can just, out the corner of my eye, see this tower tipping. Okay. Alright. This is the big one, in terms of physical size as well as importance. This is the first in the Galaxy S lineup. You can see it was born at a time when instruction manuals were much more important. This thing is in full colour. You've got the removable battery. Oh dear. This one is easily a 7 out of 10 on that satisfaction rating. Massive nostalgia trip. Okay, this is hugely exciting, having 10 generations of smartphone in one frame, and a few things become very obvious. Between the Galaxy S1 and the S5, each successive smartphone was slightly larger than the last, but after this, there was no size increase. What's actually kind of funny is you've got 4 perfectly normal looking plastic phones on the left. You've got perfectly normal looking glass phones on the right, and then the mutant Galaxy S5 in the middle. I really feel like this was a design experiment gone wrong. I also thought I'd quickly show you the setup process here, because whilst I could quite succinctly describe it with the word painful, it's not something a lot of YouTube videos show you. To cut a long story short, I've had to do the entire setup process of a phone, the charging, the updating, the setting up of accounts, on 10 different devices from 10 different generations. And as you go back, it gets slower and slower each time. Stuff kept failing, updates wouldn't download on some devices, and this process took me almost through the whole night. Anyways, by morning, I thought, okay, we're ready to start shooting this video, finally. But then I noticed a problem. You see, the Galaxy S9 that I've got here was just refusing to update to Android 9 Pie, even though the S8 that was released a whole year before it has that update. And I didn't want to make a comparison video based on old software, so I tried everything. I tried Samsung Smart Switch, which is meant to sometimes trigger an update. I tried using a manual install. I even tried using VPNs to trick it into thinking I was in a different country, just to see if that would work. But it turns out that the unit I've got here, even though it was sold to me as a UK unit, turns out it was actually originally sourced from outside the European Union, so it wasn't actually getting support for those updates. Alright, so I spent the last 4 hours trying to install a software update. Productive morning. Anyways, the only solution I came to was that I had to go and buy a new one. So I headed to town centre, head bowed in shame at not being able to install an update, and whilst there I managed to pick one up for the incredibly low price of just £530. Sarcasm. Anyways, we're back, and just to stay away from the harrowing memories of my lilac variant, I went for blue this time, although I'm not sure I like it as much. Anyways, the first thing I want to show you is how the unlocking patterns have changed over time. You can see the S2's was pretty similar to the S1's, just a little more intricate. The S3, inspired by Pebbles apparently, used this water drop design, which I quite like. The S4 though is definitely a favourite. It's kind of like a ray of light. The S5 is where minimalism and flat design start to become a little more important, and by the time you get to the S6, the focus has shifted to just being simple. This continues for the S7, but I do like how the S8 took this to the next level, with a dynamic wallpaper every time you unlock. The S9 has this too, and the S10 kind of ditched it, which is a bit of a shame. What I think is interesting, cameras, which started off as a single camera and actually remained a single camera all the way to the Galaxy S9. It's only with the S10 that it jumped all the way to a triple. Okay, time to take out 10 smartphones at the same time for a camera test. And fun fact, the way I've managed to keep these phones stuck in the exact same place is using white tack. I somehow managed to fit every single smartphone into some sort of pocket at the same time, and so, armed up like some sort of human gadget amalgamation, I headed out to test cameras. The first test being directly into the light using the rear cameras, and you can tell the first few phones are really struggling with this. As we then progress, saturation and dynamic range massively improve. And here's a quick earliest versus latest comparison, just so you can see how much. It's easy to forget that when the S1 came out, a selfie was actually referred to as a self-photograph. The whole idea of it wasn't really a thing, and so it's not a surprise that front cameras kinda sucked to start with, and they've slowly become more and more of a priority. And in fact, it's only with the S10 this year that dynamic range is actually on par with a lot of phones' rear cameras, and of course completely blows the S1 out of the water. And then nighttime, and you can see as we start to progress in phones, we also start to progress in the amount of light that is being captured. Some phones choose to display it in a different way, but it's undeniable that the amount of detail and high dynamic range being captured is on the rise. What I would say though is that my favourite shot is actually from the S9. The S10 tries to capture almost too much dynamic range and it results in a loss of image quality. So, as this is a speed test primarily, the initial plan was to run Antutu on all the phones. Just couldn't get it to work on the Galaxy S1, not even past versions of it, just continually crashes. So anyways, I decided to shift benchmarks, so instead of that, we're going for Passmark, which is a benchmark that tests all sorts of different things, CPU, GPU, as well as memory and disk. Okay, now that's done, if we look at the overall system scores on each smartphone, you can see an interesting trend. Whilst of course each phone is getting more powerful, the rate at which it does so is not exactly constant. Some are 30% more powerful than the last, and some are twice as powerful. But the most surprising thing is that when you compare the Galaxy S10 to the Galaxy S1, that is about 20 times more powerful. If we take a look at how long it takes each phone to open up the camera, the S1 is incredibly slow. You almost definitely have missed whatever you were trying to capture. The S2, again, pretty slow. And the same goes for the S3, the S4, and even the S5. I think a big part of the problem here is that with those phones, up until the Galaxy S6, Samsung was just focusing on putting more and more stuff into their phones, without focusing on how light and fast it feels. The S6 is where that changed, and you feel it straight away in the camera. The Galaxy S7 that came a year after is quite a bit faster, and by the time you get to the S8 and the S9 and the S10 that follows it, you're getting a pretty much instantaneous launch time. I also wanted to quickly show you how the speakers have evolved throughout time. It's quite an interesting test, and so for this I pulled up YouTube on each of the phones, but of course with the S1 it was never going to be easy, was it? Turns out that even though it lets you install and update it, the YouTube app doesn't actually work on Android Gingerbread anymore.
Hello, darkness, my old...
Anyways, what I did instead was just played the video through an internet browser, and this is the result. So I don't even need to tell you, there is definitely a trend upwards in speaker quality. As a quick display test, loading up the Apple website on each phone shows you just how much more newer smartphones are able to fit on their displays, especially the jump between the S9 and the S10 is quite noticeable. When I was browsing around, I also did find that some pages just wouldn't load on the S4, S3, S2, and the S1. And there's one more thing I wanted to test when it comes to display, and that is putting an equivalent wallpaper on all phones and seeing how the contrast, the saturation, and the color accuracy compare. So I found a wallpaper I liked, and using a bit of black magic known as Bluetooth, I got it onto all 10 devices, and a couple of things become quite clear. You'll notice that actually the S9's display out the box is more saturated than the S10's, and that the S8's is where saturation peaks. That's not to say it's a better display than the S10's. Whilst that phone doesn't shout and scream for attention as much, it is no doubt the pinnacle of an incredibly game-changing line of phones. If you enjoyed this video, I've got a whole load of old school comparisons like this on the channel, so I'll link them from here. My name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.